We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com.
Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. My name is Rob H, and this week I am here with...
Lee Overstreet, pinch hitting once again. I'm feeling a little bit like Rob's trying to step out on me with different pinch hitters.
Betrayal.
Hitting that 7-year itch. We've been together a long time, Rob. You're starting to see other people. I don't know what to think of it.
Yeah, I gotta do the sample platter, see what else is out there, right. Expand our horizons.
And I'm feeling a little jealous. I'm trying to look sharp today, and I tried to get my new camera working, and it didn't.
Yes.
Because I want to look good for Rob, who's been seeing other people.
Oh,
so,
sure.
I get it though. Like Joe is a CDM member, and Kurt has an amazing voice, and I'm like, what do I need to do?
Well, that's just it. In all seriousness, want to give my thanks to Kurt G for filling in last week, guest co-hosting while Tom is away, still on vacation. If you're following Tom on Facebook, he's posting photos from, I'm pretty sure they were at a wedding. That's what it looked like. He said
amazing
good wedding in his
photos.
Facebook updates. So everything seems to be going over well over there for the folks who are wondering how Tom and his family are doing. So that all seems to be good news there. We're going to get an update from Lee in not so happy tech related news because he's been having some issues going on in meeting with us today. But before we do all that, let's just quickly introduce this podcast. This is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. And to get your questions answered, all you have to do is ask us. And by far the best way to do that is to email us. Please do email us. That's the only way I can keep myself organized these days. So question@avrant.com is our email address. That is the place to go. That is the place to send your questions. First in, first out for the most part on this podcast is how that works. So question@avrant.com is where to send the questions to be answered. We do, of course, have our website, avrant.com, surprise, surprise, where you can see the show notes, including Flickr albums that have images for any of the things that we talk about that have images or diagrams or that type of thing. You can follow along there if you're not watching the YouTube video. Speaking of which, we're of course on YouTube, which is youtube.com/avrant. And we're on some of the social medias. We got facebook.com/avrant podcast. And then I can be reached individually, rob@avrant.com for my email, or @firstreflect on Twitter. Tom is tom@avrant.com for his email. And hey, Lee has email now, Lee at avrant.com. That'll actually work. We got to keep the 3-letter names rolling here as we go along.
That's right.
So.
And my Lee@avrant.com is apparently the complaint line.
That's what it's supposed to be.
But what's funny is I'm just getting fun comments there. It's really nice, actually.
That's very nice. That's quite all right. And
I'm liking it.
Lee can be found on Twitter as well. He is Lee Overstreet,
right.
And he loves his puns. So what's your Twitter address there, Lee?
My personal Twitter address is @Lee Overtweet.
Of course it is.
I haven't been super active on that lately, but I do check it fairly regularly. If you send me a direct message to @Lee Overtweet, I will see it.
It'll give him an
take
alert.
A day.
But he's much more active on his other one, which I don't have up on the screen, but he does love his puns. And some sad news for your beloved Tesla as well, right? You're not even able to drive it right now.
I see you're bringing it up. I just want to point out you're bringing up the car,
I've never
not
been
me.
the one with the whole problem with that. It's
I know.
The other AV hosts. I've been all right with it.
Well, right now Tom is overseas and he doesn't understand why he just got a spiky headache because I'm mentioning the stupid car. So we, my wife and I have a Tesla, and I created a Twitter account that's @TeslaLusa because we live in Tuscaloosa.
There it is.
Tesla-Lusa, and I'm very active there because I just find everything to do with electric cars and energy and things like that to be
I can attest to the fact that he's very active there because Twitter is definitely dying a death. That's oh man, is that on the downhill decline going on over there?
It depends on what you're doing with Twitter. I do recommend, if you want to enjoy Twitter, first of all, don't argue with idiots, and second of all, pick a topic that you like and follow things just related to that topic and be extremely picky and get rid of people that are being you-know-whats.
Which is very easy because if they have a blue check mark, then just ignore them. So
just pare it all down and don't respond or spend time interacting with anything you don't like. And that the algorithm does kind of okay.
Yeah.
Like I've learned to use it, so it is what it is, right? Like I don't obsess.
That's right.
But yeah, so the car had its 2nd anniversary with us while it was in the body shop.
Yeah.
Sigh. But because we're spoiled brats, our rental car that the insurance company is giving us is also a Tesla.
So. Well, there you go. You're not suffering too much.
Well, a little bit of suffering. Here's your first world problem of the week. Our rental Tesla is the shorter range base model, and it doesn't have a subwoofer.
Okay.
How am I surviving?
I don't know, Lee. I don't know. How you made it here today through all of that is just...
Well, think about it. Like you guys have ingrained into me the need for subwoofers, and I've come around to it. And Tom was right, and I have the 2 SVS subwoofers, and it's good. And I have a subwoofer in the bathroom here.
Okay.
Like there's an ensuite bathroom in this room that I'm using as an office. There's a subwoofer. Well, it's kind of a woofer, not really a subwoofer.
This is how we should all live.
This is how, put a subwoofer everywhere, people.
Well, before we go any further, I'm going to go ahead and thank our listeners of the week right at the top here. Listeners of the week are people who have supported this podcast in one way or another, and some of those ways are financial. So we are available to accept donations over at PayPal. So if you come to our website, avrant.com, over on the right-hand side, it says support AVRant, and that'll take you to PayPal. So Joe, who was our guest co-host 2 weeks ago, he is on a bit of a roll. He's like committed to sort of like giving in donations in return for shout-outs to avscience.com. So that's all working nicely. So Joe is a listener of the week once again via PayPal. He's, like I say, continuing his support of AV Science. So this is a little blurb, and I'm happy to read it out. avscience.com appreciates us sharing our passion and enthusiasm for home theater with all of our listeners. They, AV Science, are here to help make everybody's home theater dreams a reality. So they are authorized dealers of JVC, Sony, Epson, Barco, and BenQ, as well as other brands. So no matter how big the screen you might have in mind, they can help light it up. So check them out at avscience.com and keep up the great show, they say to us, which is very nice. So
that's not a bad copy read, Rob.
That's fun stuff all around. I just copy and pasted that and had to change the pronouns and stuff to things that made sense. So I think we did all right. That's what you got to do.
Well
that's
done.
What however many years of experience will get you. Just fantastic. So
that could almost go on the radio.
Sure, why not? There is another way to support us financially, which is via Patreon. It's patreon.com/AVRant podcast if you'd like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. Minimum of a $1 per month pledge is the rules over there, and most of that is, given to us. Patreon takes their little cut of that every month, but we are up to 138 patrons over there, which is very, very nice. And Dale is one of them. So thank you, Dale, and thank you everybody who's supporting this podcast via Patreon and via PayPal. So if you can't support us financially, find any other way, let us know about it, and we will thank you here on the podcast during the Listeners of the Week section. This is kind of financial because Vince, he sent me an Amazon gift card, so that was very nice.
Wow.
Thank you very much. I think he did a thing where it's like you can go to like those like Coinstar machines or something and like get an Amazon gift card code instead of just getting like the cash deposit back or some such like that.
Really?
It was something along those lines.
So he
I might be
dumped in a bucket
there.
of coins.
That's pretty
and
much
turned it into a card for you.
That's right. Which
Well, I just want to remind Vince
much.
that my email address is lee@avrant.com.
That could always work. It never hurts to put in the plug. So
Always try. Always shoot your shot. You never know.
That's right. Thank you very much, Vince. And then, some other folks supported us in various ways. Terry talked us up to Audio Advice, and a member of their consulting team, Audio Advice's consulting team, named Seth, was familiar with us. So, hey, there we go. We're known out there in the industry. Thank you very much, Terry. Brannon. Yes, that's right. Brannon talked us up to Accessories for Less when he bought a set of 5 Focal 301 on-wall speakers and a Denon X3800H receiver from Accessories for Less. So thank you very much, Brannon. And we know the folks over at Accessories for Less know us. That's for sure.
I truly love Accessories for Less. Like anytime, I don't even shop for, if somebody asks me about a receiver,
right.
I don't even shop for new receivers anymore. I just go there.
I know that's like the base price that we base everything on now, pretty much.
Yeah.
We haven't mentioned them in a little while, so I'm happy to do so. They'll come up later in the podcast as well. So then, yeah, some folks just send us in notes of gratitude for keeping this podcast going one way or another, and we very much appreciate those notes of encouragement. So thank you to Gurinder, Nick, Vince, Adam, Terry, who says he appreciates that we've been able to keep the podcast going with our guest co-host while Tom is away. It's always great fun, whether it's Tom and Rob or a guest co-host filling in. So thank you.
Or Lee, the pinch hitter for years and years. What if it's Lee?
Man, oh man. We haven't finished this list of notes of gratitude, so I'll carry on here. Brannon is in there. Dale, who's a member of the 2 Hour Plus Club, and he couldn't help but notice that Kurt's voice last week strongly reminded him, Dale, of Tom's voice, not in terms of like pitch or timbre, but in his speech mannerisms. So maybe it's just because they live in the same area. I don't know. I can't say I like felt as though Tom was there last week when I was speaking with Kurt, but maybe that's because I was looking at Kurt and they don't like look terribly similar. And
no. I find their voices very different, but like I said before, he has a great voice.
Yes, and you know what? I think
good voice.
I think I recall it might have been on Twitter who was like they thought Kurt kind of sounded like you. So there you go.
It's possible. Well, if I turn on a little more radio voice, if I try to do more of the radio voice, but Kurt has it naturally.
Yes.
Whereas I have more of a screamy comedic voice.
Well, what you'll notice is that anybody who thinks they have a nice voice, they don't think they sound like me. So, there's always that easy distinction. That's why I make a good counterpart, because no one will ever think that I have the good radio voice. That's very easy to tell us apart.
But you have character and you have clarity. Character and clarity is, to me, as important. Back in the day on radio, everything was about, did you have the tone? Did you have the sound? And my voice is not classic radio, not classic 80s, 90s radio. But I prefer voices where people have personalities.
I got to make up for it somehow. Anyway, I'm not done with the notes of gratitude. We got more. We got Karl, who says he hopes Tom's vacation with the family has been going really well and been relaxing. I don't know about the relaxing part, but it seems like it's been going well. So I think everything's all right over there. And Toke, who says he is working his way back through our archive of episodes, and he appreciates how we correct ourselves as new information comes along. He also thought that your review, Lee's review of the SVS SB2000 Pro subwoofers, was the best review he's heard. So
yes!
He would like to hear an update from you. It's a good thing you're here if you're still happy with those subs.
Oh man, let me tell you, when you have good audio, really good audio, good equipment, good speakers, the idea is it should disappear. Yeah, that you really shouldn't notice it.
Particularly draw your attention to it away from whatever's going on in the screen or the music or whatever.
And those SVS SB2000 Pro subwoofers are that. When I first got them, you'll remember, and as Toke probably heard in that review, I was concerned that something was missing because I was used to pumping all the bass through those big tower speakers that I have, and they're very boomy and they have peaks and valleys in the frequency response curve. And everything just seemed like it had gone away, but the clarity suddenly was there. My ears weren't being overrun with boomy bass, and I could hear the treble that existed and the mid-range that existed. Everything just got better. So yeah, I'm still perfectly happy. And I'll tell you what's great. If you remember in that review, I got super lucky when I picked my locations.
Yes.
Such that it made me confused and thinking I wasn't doing
you did like a full 360.
Rob's 12-step to hell subwoofer program. As I stepped through that, I'm like, what is going on? I must not know what I'm doing. But instead, I was super lucky. And when I ran the YPAL system on the Yamaha amp to measure the room to calibrate it, barely had like 1.5 decibel enhancements in a couple places. Now, my old tower speakers had a high increase in the treble. Up to 15K, but the subwoofer needed nothing. So I super lucked up. And I say all that to say that I haven't changed one thing. I set it up once it was perfect like that. I haven't touched it.
Well, yeah, if your room's not changing, why mess with it? So
no, I haven't touched a thing. So yes, still loving it.
All right. Well, thank you everybody so much for all your support. Thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions. And we are quickly going to touch upon what we watched, but I'm going to go through this pretty darn fast because I know Lee's got a tech update and I've got a bit of a hard out at the 2 hour mark. I've got 2 hours to record this, but
it's
not
still
a whole
the 2
lot
hour
more,
club, people. Don't worry.
It's still going to be the 2 hour club. But I did want to mention, had a little bit of time to watch a couple of things this past week. So I did watch Morbius, which is the butt of many, many jokes when it comes to Sony's Spider-Verse extended universe over there that sort of ties in with the MCU as well. But I gotta say, I actually thought in terms of the story that Morbius had, that it wasn't nearly as bad as what I was expecting based purely upon all the jokes I had heard about this movie.
Okay.
If anything, strangely, this movie was let down by its effects, and I don't want to blame the effects houses. It was very much a stylistic choice where like all the movement of Morbius and the other vampire character and that, it's like they have this weird almost like smoke effect coming off of them, which like didn't make any logical sense and then just made everything kind of like blurry and hard to see on the screen, and the facial transformations like looked like, Buffy the Vampire Slayer TV in about SD quality. So
oh my,
like, if anything, that's what let this movie down. I felt it was short. It was like a tight 90. It ended sooner than I thought it was going to. I didn't think Jared Leto's performance was bad at all. So, like, I don't know. I didn't actually think it was as bad a movie in terms of components as I was expecting it to be. It wasn't. I wasn't like laughing at how terrible it was or anything like that. But it wasn't super enjoyable. I would have kind of felt ripped off if I had paid a full ticket price and seen it in the theaters. So I can see people being upset from that point of view. I also we got to go 3 weeks for 3 weeks. I saw Spider-Man Across the Universe, Across the Spider-Verse. I did see that out in the theater. Again, I don't know what's going on with all my local theaters. They're all way too quiet. I'm really pissed off about that. It's like,
is that something happening recently across all theaters? You might want to check your ears.
Oh, no, because I mean, my levels at home haven't changed. And
I'm just teasing, but yes.
The theaters have gotten quieter, which, I mean, people have always complained that the theaters are too loud. So maybe they're like, well, hey, we can save some money on electricity costs and like probably not replace our amplifiers as frequently, and people won't complain that it's too loud anymore. So that's a shame, because, I mean, it does take away something from the experience when it's clearly not at reference volume. Not that I was seeing it in a big format theater or anything, but anyway, nothing new to say here. It's a fantastic movie. By all means, if you haven't seen it, definitely see it. Definitely watch Into the Spider-Verse first, because this is very much a sequel. And this is part one of a two-parter, so don't go in expecting a whole and full conclusion at the end. This is very much setting up for a part two, but I mean, fantastic production quality throughout the entire thing. Just unbelievable. I can't imagine how much work went into making that movie.
Nice.
It's remarkable. And it's one of those, every frame could be your desktop poster. I mean, you can freeze it anywhere, take a screenshot, and that could be a poster. So it just fantastic. And I very much enjoyed Spider Canada being in there. That was fun. Wholly new created character just for the movie. She has her hockey stick and her like parka on, so that's a lot of fun. Can't miss her.
Nice.
The one I actually want to talk a little bit about is a TV show called The Rehearsal. So this is from Nathan Fielder, who you might know from Nathan For You. Is that even his name? Did I get that name right?
I'm not gonna know, so just go with it. Sure. Yeah, that's the name.
Did I get that wrong?
Don't worry, the internet will tell you.
It will absolutely tell me. I've like got it. Yeah,
You'll
it's
find
Nathan
out.
For You. I had that right. Anyway, so Nathan For You was this like kind of interesting show where so imagine like Kitchen Nightmares, except that the guy coming in to fix the restaurant has no idea what he's doing and just takes the worst idea he can come up with and runs with it for one day and then leaves them high and dry. Like,
I immediately want to see that.
It's a comedy show, and Nathan For You was very good. And so it was always kind of questionable, like how much any of it was real, because it didn't seem like the restaurant owners were like fully actors. Like they hadn't built these sets from the ground up. Or like it looked like they were real restaurants and that, but obviously everything was fake inside of it, because the stuff that they do, there's no way any restaurant would agree to actually doing it, even for one day. But The Rehearsal takes things to a whole new level where it's almost like antagonistic with the audience. I haven't finished the whole season yet. There's only one season of The Rehearsal so far, but this is basically taking the idea, what if a reality TV show host had an unlimited budget and was basically a psychopath? Because that's more or less what's going on with the rehearsal. The outward premise of the show is, if you have an awkward situation that you don't know how to deal with, what if you could rehearse every possible outcome before you go into the real situation? And that's the supposed premise of the reality show, where he gets somebody who needs to confront their parent about something or whatever it is, and they just rehearse every possible scenario. But of course that is completely unrealistic, and he seems to have all the money in the world and every actor in the world at his disposal somehow for the purposes of this show, and it just gets completely ridiculous. But what I love about what Nathan Fielder does with his comedy, it's one of my favorite forms of comedy, which is there's funny stuff in the moment, but there is stuff that you don't laugh at immediately while you're watching the show. The next day, you think back on it and can't stop laughing. Because I call it comedy sleight of hand, because he will put something in there for 20 seconds that in and of itself is not outwardly funny, but when you think about it later, you're like, that is so utterly ridiculous. How did you sneak that in there without me turning the TV off? At how stupid it was. One of my favorite gags early, it was the second episode, is just, he just has this digital mirror out of nowhere that makes him look older than he is. And it's just
okay.
Why does that even exist? It's explained within the context of what's going on, but the notion that such a thing even exists is
I got to be honest, you are actually selling me on this, and now I want to see this. This sounds like something I'd be into.
It's find the rehearsal, find Nathan For You if you didn't watch that whole season. There's 4 seasons of that, so I love it.
There's so much in the world to watch.
No kidding, there sure is. But yes, I don't want to go any further. Let's let Lee talk about what he's going to talk about, and we'll try to get into some questions.
I'll try to make this as short as possible, but instead of what we watched, this is about what I heard.
Okay.
So finally, it's been a long time since I've been to a big concert, and I went to see Duran Duran in Nashville. And yay, that was really good. The venue did not have the greatest audio. Okay. I think Bridgestone Arena, is that a hockey arena? I don't know. But Bridgestone Arena in Nashville didn't sound great, but Duran Duran was great. And it's always nice to remind yourself what it's like to go to a big, a full power concert, right? Not just the brew pub with a guy with a guitar, but the real deal thing, and to see a band from my early teenage years. That's really exciting. So that was great. Yeah, I went to see Duran Duran.
And I think it's really important to see live concert played live, because you have to have that reminder of what it is we're attempting to recreate at home sometimes. And if you don't get that reminder every once in a while, you start sort of losing sight of how good we really have it in terms of our home equipment, and then what is still yet to improve.
Or if you're like me, you want to go down there where the audio guys are and say, move, I can't hear the saxophone. Move, let me do this. And then also an interesting milestone for me in listening to things. I finally completed my year-by-year top songs listening project. Okay. So there was a point in the past, and it might have been as many as 2 years ago, where I was just listening to year-by-year top song playlists from just before I started making mixtapes in the 80s, because I just wanted to remind myself what happened just before the... And then it just became this thing where I kept listening year-by-year farther back in time, and I found this wonderful set of playlists on Spotify that I can tell people about. I forget the name of it now, but I can link anybody. So it wasn't Billboard. It was just a guy in Scandinavia who was a statistician. He's a statistician. He just made these top song playlists.
Which is probably better.
But he did it all the way back. And when I say all the way back, I mean, I went to the 1890s. I listened to all of the music, and then I went, wait a minute, let's start over again at the year in the early 80s where I left off, and this come back to the current time. And so I finally, I have listened now to 130 years of top songs.
Nice.
And I finally completed 2022. And it's kind of neat, and the perspective it gives you is kind of amazing. And for the last 10 years, I created my own playlist anytime I heard something that I liked.
Sure.
And so now I have this hundreds of songs playlist that I called Since 13, because it's 2013 to 2022.
Okay.
And I've had a great... If you've never done anything like that, It's just super fun. It started off, like I said, as a project of me trying to see how far back does my nostalgia go. And by that, I mean a song reminds me of a time and place, not just that I know it, right? That it sparks some memory.
Yeah.
And I determined that memories like that, nostalgia for songs, for me, started maybe age 6.
Okay.
If you go any sooner, it doesn't really click into a time
Sure.
and place, but about age 6, I can remember times and places. So try it, folks. And if you want to know what playlist I was listening to, I'm doing that thing where you draw a blank when you really need the name of
That's
something.
okay. If you can put the link in the notes, I'll put it in the show notes and people can link to it from there. It'll be below the YouTube video if you're watching that, and it'll be in the show notes at avrant.com if you're finding it that way. So,
Like, it turns out I really like some 1930s jazz. Who knew?
right? Yeah. No, I mean, one of my favorite things you were pointing out is just like, we know this, but you don't always, like, you can't pull it out, just out of your head if you haven't had a bit of a reminder, is like how many popular songs were covers, that had much earlier versions, which were themselves often hit songs, but basically completely forgotten about by, people in our age group or younger than us, and didn't realize that a lot of things were covers, or just how many things have been samples of previous songs, which
what
of course
really
we're
struck me
familiar
is
with, but
any musical phenomenon that you can think of, like, sort of grunge sounding rock of the 90s, or the keyboards of the 80s, or any like the rock sounds of the 60s, no matter what you can point to, somebody did it way before then that you didn't know about.
Like.
Yes, like there's electronic music from the 60s and even some playing around with tape loops in the 50s. And I did not know that until I sort of did this project. So I highly recommend that to anybody. And then I don't know if anybody wants to hear about my stupid computer problems, but...
Well, let's do it quickly, but let's do it.
Quickly. All right, very quickly is I built a new computer, and I finally got around. Yesterday, I thought, okay, all I need to do, all I need to do is get my HDMI to USB dongle working.
Okay.
That's the Elgato Camlink 4K that I happen to have.
Okay.
And all I have to do is get that working, to get the settings right on my Sony A6400 camera, mirrorless camera, so that it'll work well and stay on and not display the data information. Anyway, so, and then all I really needed to do then was put Audacity on the new computer and then get the audio working and make sure my levels are right and everything. I thought this should be easy. And everything went wrong.
You don't say.
Everything. Like this Camlink 4K device that was supposed to take my lovely camera's signal. It worked perfectly when I first hooked it up. I downloaded Elgato's software, a little camera hub program, and it worked great. And then I clicked on a button that was supposed to collapse everything to the left just to see how that looked, and then make the picture very small over here on the left. And it did that, but the picture froze up, and then it never worked again.
Oh, lovely.
Well, the software never worked again.
Yeah.
But long story slightly less long. The dongle works, but not with any of Elgato's own software.
And I assume you've done the full uninstall, reinstall things. Yes.
Everything. Full uninstall, reinstall, power off, cold, completely. Pull the power out of the wall. Could be reboot, reinstall. And then I put it on another computer, on my notebook computer. And Elgato's software still didn't work, but the dongle works with OBS.
Okay.
But not with Elgato software.
Yeah.
But then so maybe it'll work with Skype. And then it didn't work right with Skype. It was sized wrong somehow on the new computer with Windows 11. I don't know. And so I'm just losing my mind. And then I couldn't log into Skype because I forgot what my username was. And then
That's
I tried
not anybody else's fault.
No, but that just went wrong too. It was just a comedy of errors. And then the audio, which I spent a lot on this computer, and I got what is supposed to be a nice Sound Blaster sound card, and it still has a delay, a latency.
Oh, okay.
That should be eliminated by using the specific drivers for that sound card. If you use Windows' own generic drivers, you get a delay no matter what. But if you have a nice sound card with good drivers, there shouldn't be a delay. There's still a delay. And then when I put it to the analog output, there's still noise coming from the video card like it was on the Windows 7 machine I'm replacing.
See,
which doesn't make any sense because it's all new equipment.
You skipped the version of Windows that actually worked. So that was your problem.
Well, no, my Windows 7 machine, which I'm using right now, had noise in the analog input coming from the video card. But now it doesn't. the Windows 7 machine sounds better now. That's what I'm using right now.
That's what we're on right now. Yes, yeah. When I contacted Lee last week to say, hey, come podcast with me this week, he was like, oh, good, I'll have my new computer set up by then. It'll be fun. It'll be a great test run.
Yes, exactly. And I couldn't make it happen. And it makes no sense. And the only thing that's common between the old computer and the new computer is a case. And I'm trying to figure out how a case can make video noise.
Unless there's some kind of weird grounding issue, there shouldn't be.
I know, right? Like, oh, Lord. So I've got a lot of troubleshooting to do. I'm going to employ my contacts to various audio engineers, and I'm once and for all, even if I have to spend some fat money, I'm getting clean audio in this room. I'm sick of it. So that's my suffering.
That's your computer thing. I don't particularly desire to troubleshoot through building a computer. So.
Building is great. It works great.
Sure,
it's fun, fast. Yeah. Woo, it's good. And it's going to be great for video editing, but the live audio, when you need an analog input and you need to hear yourself live, that's the thing. I ask around to people, any doofus can do a podcast nowadays, but no one listens to themselves.
So this is an internal sound card?
It is it's an add-on sound card from Sound Blaster.
Yeah, but it plugs into a PCI slot inside the case of the computer, right? Okay.
Right. And it touts its sound quality and everything, but the drivers are insane in Windows. Every new version of Windows since XP made audio more difficult.
Well, yeah, they really don't want you installing external drivers. They just want you to do whatever Windows automatically does for drivers. I've certainly found that to be the case with Windows 11. It is a pain trying to install any external drivers for anything. So
I can't believe I have like this incredibly fast modern computer and I get a delay on the audio.
Of course. It's all those bits, Lee, can't handle.
And it doesn't matter to most people because most people do not monitor their own audio while they are talking.
No, that's true.
And so I don't know how you do a good podcast or radio type thing without hearing yourself. I
find the in-ear monitors are enough because then you hear your voice inside your head anyway. And once you get used to that, no problems. Don't need a monitor.
No, that's not how it works. If you can't hear your voice as it sounds in the mix, how do you know if you are speaking correctly? It's all muffled and you can't tell if your levels are right. And
you just got to trial and error and trust, Lee.
I guess I'm old school.
Put your faith in it.
Unfortunately, I learned all this back in the radio days, so I need to hear myself.
Well, let us crack on. We've got news this week. Let's dig into it, and we'll also try to get to some questions at some point.
We will do that eventually, right? So news via Clara, the official MSRP for JVC's DLA-NP5 projector has dropped by $1,000 to $59.99. $95.
Yeah.
That puts it right in line price-wise with Sony's least expensive native 4K resolution laser projector model, the VPL-XW5000ES. Just rolls off the tongue.
Doesn't it ever?
The JVC NP5 still uses a traditional lamp rather than a laser light source, but it has some feature advantages over the Sony 5000 ES. Primarily, the NP5 has HDMI 2.1 inputs and can accept a display of 4K 120, while the 5000 ES still has HDMI 2.0 and tops out at 4K 60, although it can do 1080p 120. The NP5 also has JVC's excellent frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping for HDR, and it still has an edge in black levels in contrast. So I guess if you don't mind having something where a lamp's not going to live as long as a laser light source, it sounds like a better deal.
Yeah. So, I mean, as Tom and I have been talking about, it's like we still have our hesitancy about going full laser with everything because there's no way to replace that laser. So, if you're holding on to that projector for a while, it's like once it gets to the half brightness, you're not replacing that. You're just getting a whole new projector at that point. So we still see value in the lamp-based systems, even for someone who is using the projector quite heavily, because then anytime it does start to get a little dimmer than you can replace the lamp. Yes, there's a cost associated with that, but it's a lot less than a whole new projector. Now, naturally, it won't take as long with a regular lamp to get to the point where you want to replace it, but there's trade-offs there, as sort of the way we're coming at it. So I don't know. I've been a bigger fan in this current model era of this level of projectors going from the sort of $6,000 price class up to the, well, they go into the $26,000, $27,000 price class, with the really popular models being around $11,000 to $16,000, that type of thing. Expensive stuff, but not completely out of the realm of possibility for sort of normal normal budget type of thing. But the $6,000 ones, that's like, you can kind of save up for a while, stretch for one of those. So I've been personally a bigger fan of the JVCs in this model era, but it's mainly because some of those features that I really want, and then I really value the intra-scene contrast, the contrast that's on screen all at the same time, the blackest pixel that you can have right next to the brightest white pixel, and the JVCs are sort of tops there still. So I like that MP5. I'm never angry that it goes down in price. They had a whole thing where the MP5 came a little bit after like the NZ7, NZ8, NZ9. So all of those came out and then actually went up in price during the pandemic. All those models did. The NP5, when it came in, just came in at the $7,000 price, which I don't think is where they were aiming initially. So my suspected reason why they were maybe able to bring the price down is, like some of the shipping container prices have started to get back to pre-pandemic levels. Finally, some of the parts availability and prices have started to settle down a little bit. So maybe that aided in being able to basically bring it back to the price I think they initially targeted.
That and good old-fashioned competition. So you'll love to see all of that.
That's right. Yep.
You'll love to see it. Sony has started testing a game streaming feature that might make their mysterious Project Q handheld device make a little more sense. When Sony announced the Project Q handheld, the only thing we knew for sure that you'd be able to use remote play over Wi-Fi to play games directly from your PS5. That essentially made Project Q a Wii U tablet, offering no functionality at all unless you have a PS5 console and you're at home on your Wi-Fi connection. So it's literally just playing. It's showing you what's happening.
It's just a portable screen with a controller attached to it. That's really what it seemed like when they first announced it. Yeah, exactly.
So, but now Sony is testing cloud game streaming of PS5 games. If you are a PlayStation Plus premium subscriber, you can already stream PS1, PS2, PSP, PS3, and PS4 games from the cloud, but PS5 games still require downloading. By adding PS5 cloud game streaming, Sony opens up the possibility of actually making Project Q useful without also needing a PS5 console. Back when PlayStation Now was around as a separate cloud game streaming service from PlayStation Plus, Sony experimented with some apps for smart TVs and the like, but it closed all those down. And now the only way to stream PlayStation games from their cloud service is by using a PlayStation console. So selling their own dedicated game streaming handheld in the form of Project Q seems to make a lot of sense, and I do think it does. My only concern is, like I was complaining about audio latency, is that latency. You're going to have to be on like a good fiber connection, or you're going to need to be standing directly under a 5G tower or something to really get the speed.
Yeah, I mean, for your Twitch competitive gaming, cloud streaming has never been the solution. I don't know if we'll ever fully get there. I mean, the people who are counting frames at 144 frames per second, I don't think are ever going to be satisfied with cloud streaming. But I mean, there are plenty of styles of games, turn-based stuff, strategy games, that type of thing, where it isn't reliant on, Twitch reflexes. They can absolutely play those games very nicely over streaming. So, I mean, all of that stuff about, the cloud game streaming coming to Project Q, that is pure speculation at this point. We're just trying to think of any justification for that Project Q handheld. I mean, fine, you have a portable screen that you can use when someone else is using the TV. That makes sense. But I was saying, if it costs any more than $99, if that's truly all it does, and all the speculation is that it's at least a $200 device, it just didn't make sense. But if you can just stream games to it, not necessarily, I mean, I don't know. Maybe it still requires a PlayStation 5 just to do that. But even so, that's slightly more useful than literally only being able to use remote play for games that are already installed on your PlayStation 5, and you're really just using it as a wireless screen. At that point, that's really all Project Q would be.
Now,
so
this has to be for streaming.
This has to be.
It has to be.
What idea? That's I don't know though. It's Sony. Sometimes the thing that makes all the sense in the world isn't what they do. So we'll find out. But yeah,
they do have a history.
PlayStation 5 cloud game streaming is coming at least to your PlayStation 5 console. That is for sure happening.
let's move on to some comments, questions will happen. Comments, Colin, a correction to last week's correction.
That's right.
It turns out Rob might have been right. Rob's right about Sonos, Amazon's voice assistant, and Apple Music. After all, Colin wrote in last week to say that he was able to use either Amazon's voice assistant or Sonos' own Hey Sonos to play Apple Music on a Sonos Roam or Sonos Move portable speaker, but he went back to double check. And similar to what happened with the Ultimate Ears speakers, it seems a firmware update has taken away the ability to make that work with A-Lady.
Yeah.
Strangely, if you ask A-Lady to play Apple Music on a Sonos speaker, the chime sounds to indicate that the voice command was recognized, but then nothing actually plays. So that's a terrible user experience.
Isn't it, though? Because you're thinking, what went wrong? Because I said the voice command, it's like, yep, I heard you. I'll get right on that. And then silence. Just exactly what you want.
Your system goes, and nothing happens. Hey Sonos still works, and I wonder if I'm activating anyone's Sonos.
I don't know how many people are actually using that. I'm not too worried about it, which is why I go ahead and put it in there.
But just like before, it seems to have trouble using playlists for some reason. So apologies to AVRant listener Will if he got his hopes up. So correction to the correction, we are always ready to correct.
There we go. Yeah. We don't want somebody going out and buying something on our advice for a specific function that it turns out does not work. So basically the same thing I was thinking before. Other than Amazon's own Echo devices, I don't trust anything to use that A-Lady voice assistant to play Apple Music, because it's just, there's too many like licensing things that are out of the manufacturer's control, right? If Apple doesn't want to allow it, what can the manufacturer do? If Amazon doesn't want to allow it from their end, what can they do? If it's some server side issue, there's just too much going on. I still remain surprised that Amazon in their Echo line of speakers doesn't have an outdoor portable Echo speaker. That seems like a product class that would be right up their alley. But
one of those fake rocks.
Yeah, well, even that, or just, one of those kind of cylindrical things that they show people throwing in the pool, right? I'm like, why not an Echo one of those? Seems like it would make sense to be part of their lineup. So
it really does. Yeah. All right, another comment here from Joe, who is, I think, is he rubbing it into me?
Oh, it must be. All of us.
Joe says, hey, look at those YouTube viewership numbers from when he was the guest co-host 2 weeks ago. Just saying, winky face. It's rubbing it in. So what's my number to beat? Like 1,000 or something? We have to get so many more views. I have to share a link.
It does change, of course, but yes, no. Yeah, he was happy. He has the most views within the past 3 weeks. So congratulations, Joe.
Hey,
I
chalk
it all up to you. That's right.
Yeah. Let's do it. A long comment from Erin of Erin's Audio Corner fame. So I think this is about when you were talking about a speaker review he did.
We last week when Kurt was here. So I mean this. Not that Erin is saying anything like mean or there's any sort of argument going on here. He's making some clarifications because comments were made. But like this is one of the reasons why I don't particularly love like weighing in on other people's content, right? Because it's like, it's mostly before time, right? Like unless we literally repeat everything that they said, we're gonna miss something.
Yeah, of course. You'd have to just read their review word for word.
At which point, what are we even doing? So that's just my start with this. Honestly, I haven't read all of this in depth, so I'm kind of getting this as it comes to, because I saw this as a comment on our YouTube video. So I was like, oh, hey, I want to make sure that we're letting Erin have his say in response on our podcast. So he was kind enough to listen to what we said, leave a comment of his own. So I'm just copy and pasted, and this is what he said. This is verbatim.
Surely he understands, because you were very clear about how you thought he wasn't slamming a speaker. He was just being thorough, essentially.
Indeed, yes.
And using very clear terminology.
I had a reply or two, of course, on social media or via YouTube comment that I erased, where it's like, you cannot win, because I was like, hey, I like Erin's reviews. I enjoy listening and reading to his reviews. And there's like, everybody who posts a YouTube video is going to have their haters. So there's like the one person who's like, I had a different experience, blah, blah, blah. How can you say you like, and then the complete opposite side of that, which is like, oh, if you say anything critical about Erin, you don't know anything that you're talking about, Rob. So always the fun commenters out there, but we can ignore those outliers. Let's let Erin speak for himself. These are in fact his words, what he typed in the YouTube comment.
I will now channel Erin.
That's right.
Hey, fellas, I appreciate the discussion. I would like to clarify about a few things that were said. I don't listen to one speaker, I listen to pairs. Unless there's a rare case where someone can only loan me one, which would probably be strange.
Full mea culpa on that. That was a mix-up on me because, like the Audio Science Review ones, they do talk about listening to a mono speaker following the Harman listening advice, where in order to most reliably detect differences between different models of speakers, using mono and a single speaker and listening that way. That is something that I know they do over at Audio Science Review. I don't know. I might end up getting corrected about that now, but certainly in their older reviews, I'm 100% sure, at least in their older reviews, because I can't say I've read all the modern reviews that are up there most recently, but certainly in the old reviews, they talk specifically about using a single speaker. So full mea culpa on that, because I got up, the folks who are using the Klippel measurement systems, I interchanged some of that. So that wasn't Aaron. He listens in stereo.
Listen, constantly getting corrected is called engagement.
That's right.
Online. That is the bread and butter of all podcasts and YouTube channels, is people arguing. But at least you know that we are trying to be super duper accurate and honest about everything. So Erin continues. And initially, you're focused only on axis response and how I relate what I hear to that. Everything matters. Even speakers with identical on-axis response can sound wildly different in a room thanks to what happens off-axis. In-room prediction is a great starting point. 3 dB definitely matters. We can hear differences of 0.5 dB. Whew. He can. It's not hard to spot issues of 1 to 2 dB if they're sharp enough in Q with regard to frequency. Now,
that would be like a specific frequency, like a narrow little band that has a little 1 or 2 dB jump or dip. So I don't know, some of that, 3 dB by all accounts, yes, should be audible. That is supposed to be well within the threshold of audibility. I've certainly seen like 1 dB is what reliably people can hear. If you're listening to a pair of speakers, certainly a 0.5 dB difference between each of them, like a plus minus 0.5 dB, resulting in 1 dB overall. I'm not going to split hairs on this type of thing. Right. Yes, we all agree the small differences, they should be reliably audible. That's what the science tells us. But I go back to the whole thing of what outside of like test conditions, regular content, how much are we really going to notice if like one thing is, like one frequency is 2 dB louder than another. So, I think we'll all agree these are small differences. Test conditions, they should be reliably detectable. Agree with that. Yes, you can, if you're not looking at a full spinorama, the full family of curves around a speaker, then you are not getting the image. I'm not sure if he was talking about, because I think I showed the screen capture of his on-axis frequency response measurement more than the other measurements that were included in his review of the particular speaker we were talking about. So I'm not sure if that was directed specifically at us, or if that's more like a general comment, just saying, don't focus all your attention just on the on-axis frequency response, which I 100% agree with that. So whether that was specifically about because I showed it for, focused on that too long, or if that's just a general advice, but I agree entirely. So far, we're all in agreement here, with maybe some hairs to split in terms of what we think is the most important, but nonetheless, no actual
that hair splitting is what keeps the engagement rolling.
I am not super interested in it.
I use EQ sometimes to verify issues, range, and also to see how fixable my concerns are. And he puts fixable in quotes, like, how can I alter it? The things Amir and I disagree on.
So Amir is the founder of Audio Science Review, in case anybody's not familiar with him by name.
The things Amir and I disagree on about our subjective likes and dislikes of KEF speakers can be traced objectively. The KEF R3 Amir didn't care for was retroactively changed because he was hearing modal issues. He since has used EQ to fix bass resonances in all his other reviews. I actually found the high frequency to be a tad elevated, and for what it's worth, I often disagree with Amir on various things, but that's why having data is good. When you get in the weeds, you're going to disagree with other intelligent people. That's just how it is.
Well, it's kind of funny because where I was discussing at least my recollection of what I was saying last week, because very often, similar to Tom, by the time it comes out of my mouth, even if I listen back to it later, I don't always recall what I actually said. But the way I recall some of the conversation going last week, it was discussing the idea that neither Amir over at Audio Science Review nor Erin at Erin's Audio Corner is claiming that they're doing like a double blind listening test in these things, right? Like both of them say, okay, they listen to the speakers and form their subjective opinions prior to taking any measurements, because they don't want to like take a bunch of measurements, look at the graphs, and then listen to it and decide how they think it sounds, because they're well aware it's pretty hard to put that out of your head. But even so, anytime you so much as have any idea what speaker is playing, even if you're not looking at it, even if it's hidden behind a cloth, if someone tells you this is the speaker you're listening to, it like this is my take and opinion, but it's based on other pseudoscience research, which, you know, more or less indicates it doesn't matter how much you try to ignore your own preconceived anything about what you're looking at or what you're listening to, even if it's just by name. It's like, you can't help it. Even if you say, I'm an experienced listener, I'm going to ignore all that. You can't help it. It sneaks in there. So
that's how human brains work on everything.
That's how it goes.
We are just pattern recognition machines basing every behavior on previous experience. Yeah. So previous thoughts and experience are always there.
Yep.
There's no such thing as perfect objectivity.
I was saying it was kind of funny because like Amir has said in some of like, again, I've mostly read older reviews over at Audio Sensor, but in some of the previous Kef reviews, like just mentioning he's just not a fan of concentric speaker design. Right. I'm like, well, but wait a second. Like then if you know it's a Kef speaker, like you're like predisposed to thinking there's something that you don't like about it.
Right. So, your brain is thinking maybe it's good this time. Right. No.
I won't retread all of that, but yeah, there we go. Just a clarification from Erin there. And that's
so he continues a little bit more here. I tend to lump subjective terms with broader frequencies. Bright can mean a large range of frequencies in the treble or a single frequency. That's because I don't use a thesaurus or have a Rolodex of subjective terms to pull from.
Nor should we really. It would be nice to have like the sort of established lexicon of audio terms and actually stick to the agreed upon meanings. That would be the better way.
We should just develop on this podcast a glossary of
it's not necessary. It already kind of exists out there, but
we need to. But if we define it more precisely and just insist that that's the standard,
all we need is another standard. Yes, yeah.
Because again, engagement, nothing but arguments for years.
Wonderful.
I lost my place. I think he was talking about he was talking about his Rolodex of subjective terms.
That's right.
Rather. Based on my experience tuning and designing systems, I'm able to identify frequencies, and I use those specific frequencies to talk about where the issues are, rather than using vague terms to describe any number of things. That's
I'm a big fan of that. I will still just say this is my experience, not necessarily of Erin specifically. I'm talking about when I see the public at large using the term bright, because I see bright as a criticism very frequently, and not just of speakers, right? People talking about bright amplifiers or bright preamplifiers, that type of thing. And I won't claim more often than not, but I will definitely claim more than 0 times when I've seen measurements of whatever that equipment is, and of course when it's amplifiers or preamplifiers, it's a ruler flat line, so there's nothing to say, oh, it's actually the treble that is bright in the signal or whatever. But what I will see is something like a roll-off in the mid-bass, right? So the comment I was making there is that when someone describes something as bright, I take it with a grain of salt, even from Erin, who, like I say, I like your reviews and I like the measurements, and this isn't really, definitely not a criticism specifically of Erin himself, but when I hear the term bright applied to things, particularly as a criticism, I'm like, is it, or is it more to do with the bass response? And again, one of the things that comes up so often is, even if the speaker itself isn't bright, like it doesn't have a tipped up treble or a particular spike in any treble frequency, and it doesn't even have a rolled off mid bass or lower bass or something like that, that would give the impression of the speaker being brighter overall because it doesn't have as much mid bass or something like that. It's you bring it into a room where you get reflections that are more predominant in the mid bass or something like that. And my point was, there's a lot of masking that goes on that we are, again, no matter how experienced you are, unable to ignore. We can't separate it in our brain. And so our brain values the mid bass and the bass so much more in terms of like, does this sound like a full large speaker? If there's a lot of mid bass, you'll be like, oh, that's a full large speaker, and it sounds warm and it sounds inviting, and it doesn't have that treble harshness, and it doesn't have that brightness, even if the speaker actually is like objectively bright. If you like throw a whole bunch of mid bass into the room, all of a sudden you don't feel that way anymore. So I'm just getting at, yeah, it's great. Yes, by all means, correlate it to an actual measurement. If Erin is going to say that this speaker has a natively bright response, then he's going to have a measurement of the treble to back that up. A-okay. But I'm just saying, when I hear bright by a lot of people, it can mean a whole lot of things.
My favorite meaningless audiophile term is black backgrounds.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Oh, man, for decades, you'd hear about the black backgrounds, the velvety black backgrounds. What a great stylus this is in this cartridge. It has black backgrounds. He says, I don't purposely look for faults. It's just that they're easier to identify. If a speaker is good, then there's not much to say about it being good. It's doing what it's supposed to.
Yep.
If it has problems, then those problems are worth discussing to see if they can be remedied by positioning or EQ. Sure. Hope that helps to clear some confusion about how I go about my reviews. Take care, Erin.
Okay.
And that's a wonderful clarification.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't actually think there was honestly any disagreement there. It was
not
truly
really.
Clarification. That is absolutely what it was.
We all want to be understood.
Yes.
And these things are difficult to convey to another person. Your subjective experience of audio you're hearing, that's really hard to convey.
Nuance on the internet whatsoever in any form.
There's no such thing.
Yeah. Good luck.
No.
Anyway,
everything's black and white.
That's great. Let's see. We're almost at an hour, but we're going to get to some questions just before the hour mark. So let's do it.
Here comes the one question we're answering this week.
Pretty much.
I think we'll do more than that, but let's see.
I would
All
hope.
right. So from last week, this isn't a new question yet. We might get to new questions. Adam has a Denon X3600H receiver in his theater. He's running a 5.1.4 configuration, so all 9 of the Denon's built-in speakers are already being used in the theater. He has a Zone 2 speaker set up in a different room and a Zone 3 speaker set up going into his home gym. He wants to be able to send any of the audio sources that are plugged into his Denon to both of those other 2 zones. He has an old receiver on hand, so he was thinking he could plug his Denon's Zone 2 pre-outs into that old receiver. He doesn't anticipate actually needing different sources going in Zone 2 and Zone 3 at the same time. If he's using Zone 2 and or Zone 3, he's fine with them being the same source because he's only one person. So he was thinking he could use the stereo listening mode when he just wants the gym playing something all by itself. And he could use the all channels stereo listening mode to have something playing both in the gym and in the Zone 2 room.
That would function. Yep.
Sure. Alternatively, he could actually use the Zone 2 output of the old receiver, but just always have it set to the same input as the main zone. And that way he could power on either Zone 2 or Zone 3 independently or have them both on at the same time.
Yeah.
But that old receiver is so old, how old is it, that it doesn't have any sort of app to control it from a phone? Oh, no.
Just a good old infrared remote. That's all she's got.
You'd have to physically walk to that old receiver to at least use its remote, and that won't fly with his wife or his kids. It's terrible. What do you mean with your kids? I was a remote control when I was a kid.
There is that.
You've heard that old trope about I was the remote control. Get up and put that on channel 3, son. And that's what I did. So, first up, is there a way to get this all working without buying anything? He can control his Denon's Zone 2 pre-outs from the Hios app. So, is there some way to make that old receiver turn on and off automatically in response?
No.
Do we know of a way? I do not think so.
You could leave it powered on all the time, but then, of course, as soon as you turn Zone 2 on. So, I mean, the thing is, if all you're doing is playing something in the main theater, then you can remotely turn off Zone 2 and 3 combined because you would just turn your main Denon receiver's Zone 2 off via the app, and now there's no signal being sent to that other AV receiver, the old AV receiver. So, I mean, you could just leave that old AV receiver on all the time. So then when you turn Zone 2 on from your main Denon receiver, now that signal is going to that old receiver, which is already powered on, and then it's just a matter of choosing whether you're playing it in Zone 2 all by itself or Zone 2 and Zone 3. Right. So you could do that, but in terms of having some kind of remote access other than just the infrared remote that came with that old receiver, there's no way of controlling that with an app on your phone or something like that.
So like the infrared remote that came with that receiver, that's truly not good enough for everyone. That's not, like you can't.
I mean, not if you want to turn it on from upstairs or from the other room, right? You'd have to at least go to the same room.
Well, they used to make infrared remote extenders, but now you're buying something. So
yeah.
So yeah. His wife also wants to be able to use their Amazon Echo devices to easily be able to tell A-Lady to play Apple Music. They even have some spare Echo Dots lying around, not being used at the moment. He knows he could plug an Echo Dot into a cheap stereo amp in each room, and that would give them independent control for streaming music in Zone 2 and Zone 3. But he still wants to be able to send any audio source that's plugged into his Denon to Zone 2 and Zone 3 as well. Is there any way to make that happen just using their existing Echo Dots?
Nope.
No, you got to have something to hear it on.
Yeah, there has to be. I mean, because like the Echo Dots don't act as an input for some kind of external source, right? Whatever they can pull down from the internet themselves, streaming music services, they can do that. But no, there wouldn't be a way to send your cable TV feed that's plugged into your theater's receiver, your Denon receiver in your theater, to send that into an Echo Dot somehow. No, not an Echo Dot. We're going to talk about a device that can kind of do this, but not the Echo Dots that you already have. So can't be quite that simple, I'm afraid. Let's see. You could have your old AV receiver. You could certainly have the Echo Dot as another source, right? You've got the Zone 2 pre-outs from the original Denon, the main theater's Denon, plugged into one pair of inputs on there. You could have an Echo Dot plugged into a different input. But again, now if you want to switch inputs and do it remotely, you have no way of doing that other than the infrared remote. So
that's right.
Yeah, we're back to that.
Okay. He found the Amazon Echo Link amp, which he had never noticed before. That could power the Zone 2 and Zone 3 speakers with its 60 watts times 2 amplifier, or he could have an Echo Link amp in each room for independent control. And the Echo Link amp can take commands from an Echo Dot and stream the music itself. Plus, it has line-level inputs that could take the Zone 2 pre-out signal from his Denon. Seems like a solution.
It does.
But it's $300 for each Echo Link amp. Doesn't that seem a bit expensive for a 60 watts per channel amp? Well, yeah.
It's that and more, though.
Yeah, it's not just an amp, so...
it's an analog to digital converter for that line level in. It is a 2-channel amplifier. It is itself an internet-connected and network device. So, as far as Echo devices go, it seems a little bit more expensive, but it's because they're positioning it directly against something like the Sonos Connect amp.
Right.
Which is a bit more expensive than this. So, they're probably anticipating not selling these in anywhere near the volume as Echo Dots, right? They know they're going to sell a bajillion Echo Dots, which are essentially loss leaders, just to get you into their ecosystem. This device, they're selling far, far fewer, so they're positioning it more against the other market competitors than they are just literally how cheap they could possibly sell it at cost or below cost. This one, they actually seem to be trying to make a profit on because they're not selling very many of them in all likelihood.
So, yeah, he asked, is there a cheaper solution? Maybe a distribution amp with auto sensing and 2 sets of line level inputs so that he could plug his Denon's Zone 2 pre-outs into 1 set of auto sensing inputs and an Echo Dot's line level outputs into a second set of auto sensing inputs. Would that work? There are such things. Would that work?
So, there's a very affordable $150 from Audio Source, their Amp 100 VS. This is like one of my favorite just plain stereo amplifiers to recommend when people are like, I've got the 9 amplifiers built into my main receiver and I want to go to 11 speakers. This is one of the favorites because it's not crazy overpriced. This Audio Source one is actually Class AB. It's not Class D. It's 50 watts per channel times 2, but that's pretty genuine 50 watts Class AB that this thing is providing into an 8 ohm speaker load. So I like the amplifier that's built into here. They've been reliable. They've been around for ages and ages. And on the back, they've kind of got all the things that you need to do exactly what you've been talking about. So they have the main set of left-right inputs. That's pretty self-explanatory. But then they have a second set of left-right inputs that are actually called interrupt.
Hey.
So like that's where you could plug your Echo Dot into there. So then even when the voice comes on, it'll actually interrupt the signal that's already playing. So you can hear the voice command and then it'll default back to the main in once that interrupt signal is no longer there. So that could work pretty well for that scenario. It is auto-sensing. You can change the power mode, whether it's on all the time or auto-sensing or manual on and off based on the front panel control. So it's got those things going on. I think it's 15 minutes with no signal. It automatically puts itself in standby. And then it has both speaker A and speaker B binding posts. So this won't let you play two different sources simultaneously, right? You can't have source one going to just speakers A and source two going to just speakers B. Speakers A and B are either, it's speakers A playing whatever given source, or it's speakers B playing whatever given source, or it's both. Speakers A and speakers B playing one source. So it's not matrix switching between sources and output, but it would let you do the independent, do I just have zone 2 going? That's speakers A. Do I just have zone 3 going? That's speakers B. Or do I have both zone 2 and zone 3? That's speakers A and B. But it is push button control for those speakers A and B. It's not remotely controllable. So, but I'm assuming, okay, you're going down to the gym, you're in the basement, so you can go to this thing and press speakers A or B. So functionality wise, it does everything that you described for $150.
So there you go, half price.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned a Dayton device.
Yeah, I did just want, because, like Tom has the Dayton version of this, but at the moment, the Dayton APA 102, which is virtually identical functionality, that's a Class D version, but it's at $170 right now. So why pay even $20 extra? And then Outdoor Speaker Depot, they have their XMP 100, which is virtually the same thing, but it's a little less powerful and it costs the same. So
okay.
In the end, the audio source right now seems to have the best value.
There you go. Rob emailed Adam to mention the audio source AMP 100 in case things were time sensitive. They aren't. So Adam thought of a few other things that might be nice to have. So here comes some more information.
Yeah, so the bare functionality, I met that, and he's like, what about these other things?
Yeah, let me just add a few more needs. He'd be willing to spend about as much as an Echo Link amp would cost if he could control whether zone 2, zone 3, or both were powered on remotely, and he could connect directly to the amplifier via Bluetooth and AirPlay. Is there something similar to the audio source AMP 100 that would let him do all of that?
So I would have to say, like, certainly for the price, no. In pure simplicity, no. What you're at now is a receiver.
It's just a receiver.
That's what you're asking for at that point.
It's just another
right?
receiver, yeah.
Yeah, so now we're buying a new receiver to do all of those things. So if you want to keep it about as simple as you can and get everything that you want to do, I could point you to Yamaha's stereo receiver, their RN303. That going brand new is $330. So, that's a little bit more expensive than a single Echo Link amp. But what you've got there is full app control through Yamaha's Music Cast Control app. So you want the full app control, be able to control it from upstairs? You can do that with the RN303. It's got Bluetooth in. It's got AirPlay. It has its own streaming services, so you don't even need to plug an Echo Dot into it if you just want to stream music. It can do that directly. It will take commands directly from an Echo device, so you can talk to the Amazon voice assistant and have it give commands directly to that Yamaha.
Okay.
There's functionality going on there as well. You can control whether speakers A or speakers B or both, and that is what it would do. It'd still be speakers A and speakers B because this is a stereo amplifier, but it does have those sets of binding posts. But you can control that from the Music Cast Control app. So I looked that up to make sure you could, and you can. So that has all the features that you talked about. You can find that refurbished from Accessories for Less for $270.
There you go.
Plus or minus $30 around the $300 price point of the Echo Link amp. But this gives you speakers A and speakers B, all the functionality that you were talking about. And I mean, it is just a full receiver. It's a stereo receiver, but it's a full receiver. So you can definitely do all the things, but it's not $150. We're going to have to increase the price a bit from there. If what you wanted was like full separate zones, right? Because with that stereo app, you're still looking at playing a single source out of both zone 2 and zone 3. You would have them connected as speakers A and speakers B. You're not going to be able to send individual sources to individual rooms. So if you do decide, hey, I actually would like to send individual sources to individual rooms, now you're just talking about getting, like a 5.1 receiver that has a powered zone 2. So about the least expensive I could find that could do that for you would be going to Accessories for Less and getting a Denon S750H. That's actually a couple of model years back, but that's $320. So we're right in this same sort of price
Still
range.
in the same zone. Yeah.
And that gives you a fully separate powered zone 2 that you can send an independent source to that and then send a second different source to the main zone, and now you can have full control of everything. And of course you have the Denon app to control everything remotely. So you can look at what's available at Accessories for Less. They have a couple of Yamaha 5.1 receiver models that are even a little bit less than $300, but those ones, it's not fully independent zone 2. They actually call it zone B, which is basically the same thing as what you're doing with your speakers A and speakers B.
Right.
Zone B can be turned on and off independently, but it's still playing the same source as whatever's playing in the main zone when they call it zone B. So the least expensive one I could find that is fully independent zones is the Denon S750H.
Interesting how the functions he wants all lands in the same price zone, really.
Yeah. But
it really does.
He ends up replacing that old AV receiver that has no app to control it. That's where we've ended up.
That's where, if it comes down to that and people can't just reach for the remote, then that's what you got to do for the family members that can't reach over here for the remote and hit the button. Adam has more questions. In Adam's living room, he has a 4K Samsung TV and a 5.1 speaker setup that uses a passive 3-channel speaker bar and a pair of surround speakers. The only source that really gets used in there is the Apple TV 4K, and he was using an old Onkyo receiver that could only go up to 1080p to power the system. He already had the HDMI board of that Onkyo replaced once before, and now it seems to have gone out again. Strangely, if he plugs the Apple TV into the front HDMI input of the Onkyo, that still works, but none of the HDMI ports on the back. He'd be fine plugging the Apple TV directly into a Samsung, but he'd still like to use the surround speakers. If there were such a thing as a small, dumb 5-channel amplifier that just takes an eARC connection, that would be perfect. He kind of wishes he could get away from a traditional receiver, mainly because he wants something he could hide away. A regular AV receiver would work if it were about 3 inches less deep, and it needs to be inexpensive too. Any suggestions there, Rob? And he is, I kind of feel that, like, I really don't want big equipment everywhere.
I mean, this again, all I can really do is point you to an AV receiver, but a basic one, really no frills on this thing. But here I can, like, if you just want to power a 5.1 speaker system and be able to use eARC from anything that's, coming from the Samsung itself, or plug your Apple TV 4K into one of the HDMI inputs of this AV receiver and send it along. I mean, you can actually get, this is again Accessories for Less coming to our rescue to bring the price down, but you can get for $250 Denon's S570 BT for Bluetooth, because that's the only wireless that the 570 has. It doesn't have any HEOS, it doesn't have any app control, it just has Bluetooth. But I mean, when you were talking about a dumb eARC 5-channel amplifier is really all you want, like, that's kind of getting close to what this is for $250, but it has HDMI 2.1 switching. So I mean, like it's right up to date as you can be for HDMI. It's got 4 HDMI 2.1 inputs, and it'll switch between them.
That's impressive.
I mean, there's no downside on the HDMI side. $250, it doesn't get any less expensive, honestly. There is a Yamaha, their RXV 385, which is about the same, also $250, but that doesn't have HDMI 2.1. So it's kind of like, well, why would you?
Right, I wouldn't.
Not much reason to go there. So, those are two options at the $250 price point. I can't really get much less expensive and still have 5 amplifiers and an ARC connection built into the thing. So, I mean, that's about all I can point you. What I will say, and one of the reasons I did include the Yamaha on the list, is you were talking about the depth of the AV receiver. So the Denon 570, like most AV receivers, the full-sized ones that are powering a 7-channel system, they're about 16 inches deep. That's on average about
Typical.
how deep they are. The 570 is 13 and a half inches deep, so it is 2.5 inches less.
He asked 3 inches less deep.
Yes,
and there you go.
The Yamaha RXV 385 is only 12 and a half inches deep from front to back. So if that 1 inch of physical space is the reason the Yamaha would work better, I'm happy to include it on the list because it's basically a dumb 5-channel amplifier with an ARC port, but it's HDMI 2.0 instead of 2.1, but it'll still do all the functions you need. And you could absolutely still plug your Apple TV 4K directly into that Yamaha because it's not doing 4K 120. You don't need HDMI 2.1 for an Apple TV. So either of those should work, and I think physically should be able to fit.
Look at that perfect recommendation. 3 inches less deep or like 6 inches less deep.
It's
or
just
something
not
like
free, though, and it's not $150.
That's
$250,
true.
Yeah.
But, you got to buy things sometimes if that's what you need.
Yeah.
So let's do a second old question. And then we will begin the show.
Will we now?
Vince had a question. Vince wants a gaming monitor. Something in the 24-inch to 32-inch size range and under $1,000. He actually wants to be able to use it with his PS5 and Xbox Series X, so he'd like a monitor that can take full advantage of everything those consoles can output. What do we suggest? And by the way, if you see me swatting, there's like a gnat going around my face.
Okay, yes. It is Alabama. It is the summertime.
It
is,
and no matter what you do, you get stuff in here.
No
That's true.
kidding. Yeah, so my real honest recommendation, because, this is for under $1,000. I want a display that I can use as a computer monitor that will also give me all the green check marks for everything my up-to-date gaming consoles can output. Right. And the answer there would be a 42-inch LG OLED. Right now, you can get the C2, right? The C2, which is the 2022 model, but you can get that for $900 right now. So the only thing it doesn't check is it's larger than the screen size range that you mentioned, because it's 42 inches, it's not 32 inches. But I want to, you mount it on the wall, or you push it a little bit farther back on the desk. Like, you can get used to a 42-inch computer monitor pretty quickly and easily.
Especially if it's a OLED. That would be beautiful. Do it.
At this price range, it's the only thing out there that will literally give you every green check mark that the Xbox Series X can have, because there are no other displays that will let you do gaming with Dolby Vision at 120 hertz with variable refresh rate. All right. You can get 4K with Dolby Vision and variable refresh rate at 60 hertz with other displays, or you could get 4K at 120 hertz, but not with Dolby Vision with other displays. But to get all the things simultaneously, LG's OLED is like kind of the only game in town. So if you can see your way to the larger screen size somehow, that is my number one answer with a bullet. There's nothing else that can equal everything on there. Let's just say it is too large, because maybe it is. Sometimes you have space restrictions. Maybe it's too large.
Not too large. It's never too large.
I'm still going to favor going for an OLED if you can. And LG has their Ultra Gear 27-inch OLED computer monitor. HDMI 2.1 inputs. It'll do 4K 120 with VRR. It will not do Dolby Vision. Okay. It's under $1,000. It's $890. So about the same price as the 42-inch LG OLED. But this is a 1440p resolution display. It is not 4K. So, it'll take the 4K 120 signal for gaming, or you can set those consoles to 1440p output and get 1-to-1 pixel mapping, even better. But no Dolby Vision on there, and obviously the smaller screen size. But if that's really what you need, then okay. I wanted to find a 32-inch option, right? There's no 32-inch OLED option at this price point that I would be able to point to. So about the next best thing I could point you to, Samsung in their LCD lineup. So one of the things I like about Samsung's computer monitors is they actually use VA panels, vertically aligned panels, as opposed to the IPS, the in-plane switching panels that have much worse black levels and intrascene contrast. I don't really know how people are satisfied with their IPS computer monitors for
I am, only because IPS monitors with the better viewing angle and the much more accurate color.
Yes. Yeah.
And so if I'm being picky and I'm trying to get something to look like it really looked to my eyeball in a photo or a video.
For work purposes, I get it. For content consuming purposes, I'm like, I want the better black levels, you know?
Well, I just got a new Dell monitor that uses a new LG panel for IPS, and they did improve it. It still has hot spots. If you get, you'll see the corners are lit because it's edge lit. The problem is everybody stopped making direct backlit monitors.
Pretty close.
Everybody, unless you're ready to spend $5,000.
This is basically what I'm pointing at. Samsung has their 32-inch. This is their Odyssey Neo, and it's important because there is also, so this is the Odyssey Neo G7, all right? There's a more expensive G8 that has more zones of local dimming, but to me, it's important if you're getting one of these Samsung monitors to make sure it's the Odyssey Neo G7 or G8, because the Neo indicates mini LED backlights, and it makes a significant difference versus the traditional LED backlights that have much more blooming and much more clouding that goes on in those backlight systems. With the mini LEDs, you're getting, it's not as good as OLED. I will flatly say it's not as good as the OLED monitors, but you're getting about as close as you can with an LCD monitor at that point. One other thing I don't particularly love about the Odyssey Neo G7 is that it's curved. There's no way to get a flat version of it. I don't love curved monitors.
I hate them.
It's $1,000. It's 32 inches. It's about as close to OLED performance as you can get from an LCD. So I will mention that it's there, Samsung's Odyssey Neo G7. But my real answer is find a way to make a 42-inch LG OLED work and get the C2.
Yes. Do whatever it takes to get that OLED. So, Rob, let's start the show.
Oh, we still got some time? Let's do it.
Don't we? You tell me. So let's start the show finally. That was all the brief intro and catching up and talking about what we need to talk about. So today, our first question, new question of the week, is from Gurinder. Gurinder is planning to get a couple of pairs of KEF CI160ER in-ceiling speakers to replace his current Polk in-ceiling Atmos speakers. He looked up KEF's recommendations for backer boxes, and they have two options: a smaller box for, quote, reasonable low-frequency extension, and a larger box for, quote, ideal low-frequency extension. It's like they're just... I don't know. It seems like they're denigrating their own products. So this one's only reasonable. This one's really good over here.
If you have to.
The smaller box would be easier to build and, more importantly, easier to install in the ideal positions in a ceiling. But do we know how significant the difference in low-frequency extension would be? His intention would be to cross them over to his subwoofers somewhere from 80 hertz to 100 hertz. My initial reaction is that's not going to make that much difference and do what's much easier.
For Atmos speakers, like,
not going to make enough difference.
Try to make me care any less. I'm really happy that you want to put backer boxes on them. I'm all about that. And yes, much more important to be able to position your Atmos speakers than it is for your Atmos speakers to have lower bass extension. That, like, there's just not much below 200 hertz in those Atmos channels. It's predominantly sounds above 200 hertz in those Atmos channels.
Yes.
So yeah, by all means, I would still go ahead, have the fun, play a sweep through the thing, see how low it does extend once it's installed. I would assume you're going to get, like with the smaller backer box, you're going to have flat response to about 110, 120. And it's going to start to roll off at that point. So like a 100 or a 110 hertz crossover is going to be pretty seamless as long as you get that blend. And there's no problem with that when it's your Atmos channels. It's just not a problem. So yeah, Kev, I'm not going to like say that they're wrong. Like if you're using those in-ceiling speakers as your whole house audio speakers, that's all that's playing your music in a room. There's no subwoofer being crossed over. You want to have some half decent bass response. Ideally, you'd put the bigger box on the back of it. I don't disagree with that. That is true. Like I say, you put the smaller box, it's going to start rolling off 110, 120-ish, that type of range. Right. But for Atmos, that is no problem at all.
He pretty well answered his own question when he said easier to install and easier to build. So.
Right? You see this word reasonable versus ideal. Much more important to me is the placement. I would easily, for any Atmos speaker installation, in a heartbeat, I would trade better placement for less bass extension because it's just...
Yes. That's the whole point of Atmos.
So unimportant to have bass extension on your Atmos speakers.
Right. I would hang a bare car stereo speaker from the ceiling before I would go through any trouble for Atmos speaker.
So definitely build the smaller box.
Yes.
Done.
Done and answered. Here comes Nick with some questions. Nick has a TCL 75 Q825 TV. If he plugs his PS4 directly into that TV using any of its 4 HDMI inputs, including the one marked for HDMI ARC, he's able to use 4K and HDR, no problem. But if he plugs his PS4 into his Denon X1600H receiver and then plugs his Denon into his TCL's HDMI ARC port or any of the TCL's other HDMI ports, HDR won't work. Yeah. He wants to be able to use lossless audio from the PS4 and also keep the system as simple to use as possible for his family. So he really wants to be able to plug all of his sources into the Denon. He also wants to be able to use the TCL TV's built-in streaming services, so the HDMI ARC connection is necessary.
Yep.
When he checks the Denon's HDMI settings options, he can see there's a choice of standard or enhanced, but if he tries to select enhanced, he gets a message that his TV does not support HDR. That's very confusing since HDR works fine if he plugs his PS4 directly into the TV.
Yeah.
He made sure to use an ultra-high-speed certified HDMI cable to connect the Denon to the TCL, and he's tried both HDMI cables going straight from the PS4 to the TV, and both work. So, any idea how to fix this situation?
Yes. So, okay. I'm just going to let you know, it's a setting in your TCL TV, so... Don't blame the Denon.
Interesting, because it feels like the Denon, doesn't it, from what he describes?
Because you're like, everything works when the Denon isn't in the signal chain. I put the Denon in the signal chain and it all stops working. But this is a setting in the TCL. I don't know why it's like this. I have no idea. But it's not like an obvious setting that you're going to notice, because not in the picture settings, it's not even in like the HDMI CEC settings or anything like that. It's in the input settings, right? So there's input settings for each individual input on that TCL TV. And for each of the 4 HDMI ports, there is an HDMI mode setting. Okay. Now, by default, the mode is set to auto. And you would think...
That sounds perfect, right?
Yeah. And you plug the PS4 directly into the TCL TV, you leave its input HDMI mode set to auto, and it all works fine. But then you plug the PS4 into the Denon, you plug the Denon into the TV, and suddenly the Denon says, this TV doesn't support HDR, which makes no sense. Well, there are the 2 other options under the HDMI mode setting for each individual input. So if you have more than one source device going into this TCL, you might have to change it input by input. It is unique to each input.
Wow,
now,
really?
I knew this when the settings were labeled as auto, HDMI 2.0, or HDMI 1.4. Those were the 3 options. Now, we had a little back and forth via email, so he let me know that at some point there was a firmware update and they decided to change the names. Yeah. So now the 3 options are auto, compatibility, or standard.
See, just so put the numbers right? there. Just put the numbers. The same weirdness happens in the world of electric cars. There's those chargers from like Electrify America and others that they changed it from saying 150 kilowatts and 350 kilowatts to ultra rapid charging and super extra super rapid charging. Just put the numbers. People understand numbers.
Well, for the people who don't, they didn't want to confuse them, so now they've named them auto, compatibility, and standard. So you need to manually change the HDMI input mode for whatever HDMI port you're using to plug the Denon into, that needs to be set to standard now. Because compatibility is what used to be HDMI 1.4 mode. Standard is HDMI 2.0 mode. Auto is still auto. I don't know why auto doesn't work.
I once had a motherboard on a computer where it was set to auto and everything was overheating. And I set it to normal.
Oh, okay.
And everything worked great.
There you go. Yes.
This is the same thing.
So you need to find the input settings on your TCL TV, go to the HDMI mode, and set it manually to standard for the port that you're plugging the Denon into. Then the Denon should let you set the Denon now, to enhanced HDMI mode, which is also necessary in order to get HDR to pass through the Denon into the TCL now that it lets you.
So one manufacturer calls it standard, the other one calls it enhanced?
Yep. Clear
Perfect.
As mud.
Standardization.
So
everything works so well. Yeah, setting as TCL's HDMI ARC input 4 to standard HDMI mode, and then setting as Denon to enhance got 4K and HDR working. So that's part of that back and forth y'all had.
Yep.
But then a new option popped up, allowing him to activate auto low latency mode. Latency, there's something I know about. Should he turn that on? There's a warning on screen that it could make picture quality worse. Auto low latency mode can make picture quality worse, which he obviously wouldn't want, but he plays lots of games on his TV, so he does want the lowest latency possible. What should he do?
Yeah, so one thing I like about TCL's Roku TVs is that with a lot of other TVs, they'll have like under the picture modes, right? You'll have movie mode, you'll have sports mode, you'll have filmmaker mode maybe, and then a lot of them have a game picture mode, like it's labeled game, and you select that picture mode for gaming purposes, and then you have like a whole set of calibration controls just for that game picture mode.
That's right.
And quite often on a lot of TVs, the game picture mode doesn't give you all the calibration control that the cinema picture mode does, or something along those lines. Or sometimes they do this weird thing where it's like the way you set the white balance in cinema mode is different than the way you set the white balance in game picture mode, and there's stupid stuff like that annoys me. So one thing I like about TCL's Roku TVs is you pick the picture mode that you want to use, cinema mode or something along those lines, and then they just have a toggle inside of that picture mode for game mode on or off. So it doesn't change like cinema versus standard or whatever the name of the picture mode is. Just there's a game mode toggle within every picture mode, which is the low latency mode. So you can turn that on or off manually, right? So auto low latency mode is part of the HDMI specification. It's something that your game console can send out a little flag, a little signal flag. And if your TV and your game console are both compatible with HDMI auto low latency mode, when you turn on the game console, it'll automatically put your TCL TV into that game mode. And then when you're using a different source, it'll automatically turn that game mode off. So the reason they warn you that it might degrade your picture quality is if you're someone who likes the noise reduction, the edge enhancement, the dynamic contrast, all of these things that add some latency because there's some processing going on.
Gotcha.
They're saying, okay, you turn auto low latency mode on. Well, all of those things are going to turn off. Your noise reduction, your frame interpolation, your motion smoothing, all of those things are going to turn off. Now, we kind of want to do that anyway to get the cleanest signal. So I don't really have a problem with just manually turning game mode under any of the selectable picture modes. I don't have any problem just toggling game mode on and leaving it that way because I don't want the edge enhancement and the noise reduction and the motion smoothing.
So it sounds perfect.
Yeah. So the other thing to know is auto low latency mode out of the two consoles really only works with Xboxes. PlayStation doesn't support it. So given that it's a PlayStation that you were talking about plugging into this thing, it's kind of neither here nor there, but it's worth knowing that that game mode toggle exists because if you want the lowest latency while you're gaming, toggle that game mode on. I would argue leave it that way. But
sure, why not?
If you are someone who's like, no, when I'm watching TV, I like to have the noise reduction on or something like that, well, you can just toggle that game mode off. You don't have to change picture modes and that'll all work just fine.
All right. He's got a little bit more of a question here. Nick says he's been hooking up home theater systems for about 25 years at this point. He rarely checks a manual, but simply getting 4K and HDR to go from his PS4 through his Denon to his TCL TV involved having to manually activate a setting in all three of those devices.
Yeah.
And each device had a different name for that setting. and you kind of had to hunt for them. Wonderful. Furthermore, he can easily envision one of the two HDMI cables in this signal chain being the wrong type of HDMI cable.
Be easy enough.
If you don't know about that stuff. And he knows what to ask about, at least. Doesn't this all seem too complicated? Yes.
We agree. Yes.
He'd be surprised if any non-tech savvy person got this all working the way it's supposed to. How would they even know? They don't.
Yeah, no.
And they don't get it working perfectly.
No.
But this does frustrate me in the world of electronics, audio, video, and computers. Sometimes I wonder how anybody gets anything done. Because engineers are very bad at speaking normal person. Like, you need a translator, someone who can talk to engineers and then talk to regular humans. Exactly. That's the kind of stuff we're trying to do with this podcast.
Yeah. But I mean, honestly, why should anybody have to come to a podcast or a YouTube video to just connect your game console to a surround sound system, plug it into TV, and get I mean, what he's driving at is all of this derives from the fact that every manufacturer has decided it's much more important to get a image, not necessarily the best image, but a image onto your TV screen. Because, like, if you don't get the best image, some people will complain. Not the majority.
Not the majority, yeah.
If you get no image, everyone will complain.
Everyone complains. You got a point there, sure.
We're going to make sure that no matter what you plug in, you're going to get a image.
That's right.
But no, in fact, it's almost going to be difficult to get the best image that is possible from these devices all connected to each other. But I mean, they've all erred on that side, and I understand why they do it. But yes, HDMI CEC was theoretically supposed to solve all of this, right? There's supposed to be this handshake between all of your HDMI devices in the signal chain. They were all supposed to tell each other what they're capable of doing and automatically set themselves to have the best signal between all of the connected devices. That was the theory behind it. But of course, none of the manufacturers can actually cohesively work together. They all want to make some kind of proprietary thing where only their brand of devices work with their brand of TV and their brand of soundbar. So this is where we've ended up with. I completely agree with you. I think it's nonsense. I think it's ridiculous. The amount of stupid information I have floating around in my head that, like, I get the people like, how does Rob remember all that stuff? Great. I'm feel happy that I'm useful in that way, but honestly, why should I have to have that kind of information floating around in my head? It is stupid. So we're in agreement, but I don't know that there's honestly much we can do about it.
There's not much we as consumers can do about it. I don't know how you contact engineers and say, hey, stop it.
Yeah.
Talk to some regular humans. and because you could make it where it made the right decisions and asked the right questions of the user, what they were plugging in.
But you would have to have industry-wide cooperation to some sort of communication standard.
Yes.
Yeah.
Some.
Good luck.
Or, like I said, just ask your consumer the right question on screen and maybe you could step through it better.
Sure. Yeah.
On a different topic, Nick has a Spotify Premium account. He typically chooses what to play from his iPhone. He's got a Chromecast in the kitchen, a couple of Denon AV receivers in different rooms, a couple of TCL Roku TVs, an LG OLED, and an Apple 4K TV. Mm-hmm. He can use his iPhone to get Spotify playing on any of them via Spotify Connect. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But if he starts the music playing on one device and then he also wants that same music playing on another device in a different room, it doesn't work. The Spotify music will switch to the new room but stop playing in the first room. Yes. It seems like this should be an easy whole house audio solution. Yeah, it seems like it. But he can't seem to get it working that way. Is there a way to do it? Lord. I feel you, man. In this modern age, shouldn't it be possible that every device in my house detects the strength of signal from my Bluetooth source, and whoever's got the strongest signal plays the audio?
Like follows you around, but that's not even, he doesn't even want it following him. He just wants to be able to say, hey, yeah, you're already playing in this room, also play in this other room.
That ain't how it works.
So, I mean, this is something that I have definitely seen people requesting of Spotify since at least 2017. And it has never come to pass. About the closest you can get to it is, like, let's say every device that you had in your room was from Denon and used HEOS. Well, then in the HEOS app, you could combine speakers into groups, and then you could play your Spotify service from your phone to a given Heo speaker group. Or you can do that same sort of thing with like if all your speakers are Sonos or if all your speakers are MusicCast, whatever it is. Everything is Chromecast, right? But you've got this hodgepodge of Chromecast, Heos, Roku, LG. Like you've got all these different things, and they just won't let you do it. There's no simple way for you to just go in the Spotify app and say, yeah, play it on these 3 devices simultaneously. They just won't let you do it. The closest you can get is having a homogeneous system already and then grouping the speakers ahead of time in that system. You can't even do it after the fact through the Spotify app itself. You can just tell the Spotify app to play to an existing group of speakers that you've already set up beforehand, but there's no real way you can realistically do that in your system. Maybe the 2 Denon AV receivers, but that'd be about it. So yeah, about the only... it's not a great solution. About the only thing you could do is get a Spotify Premium Family account. That would let you send 6 independent streams to 6 independent devices in your house. But to actually get them to all
sync up, would they?
They wouldn't necessarily all sync up. That's why I mean it's not really a solution. It's not really a solution.
No, that's not a solution. That would be a cacophony.
You could at least have Spotify from technically one account, like it's a family account, so there's 6 up to 6 different separate accounts in there, but that's about the only way you could have every room playing Spotify simultaneously rather than only being able to pick one room at a time. So I don't have a great solution for you. You are not the only one. People have been requesting this of Spotify for ages. It hasn't happened.
And I swear I have thought for years and years that I wanted another zone or some multiple speakers around, and over again I've just given up.
Yeah.
It's just too hard. It's not worth it. So
it's
I just
kind of like you got to pick an ecosystem and go with it. That's
an ecosystem, or just do what I do, and each room you spend time in, that's a separate room. You just do separate stuff in that separate room. That's what I've ended up doing because no one's really solved this. It would take somebody writing a new standard.
It's interoperability between different brands, and they don't like it.
No, they don't. Now we're moving on to another questioner. Terry has questions. Terry has a couple of shout outs that he wants to give for some great customer service that he's received. And then he has a question that arose from a recent purchase. So first up, after listening to all of our advice and then doing a bunch of research on his own, Terry decided he'd like to change his Golden Ear Triton Tower speakers to something else. And he'd like to get a perfect timbre match across his front 3 speakers. He started making preparations to sell his Golden Ear Towers, and it was only then that he realized the built-in amplifiers that power the bass drivers of both tower speakers had both blown. Well, that's going to make a difference. Because of our advice, he had set his front speakers to small, and all the bass was being handled by his pair of subwoofers. Not all the bass, but yeah. He did think something sounded a little off lately, but since the little green light on the amplifier still comes on, he didn't realize until he tested each speaker individually that there wasn't any sound coming from any of the tower bass drivers. Wow. Yeah. Goodness, yeah, that's different than, you're not... Those woofers on those speakers are supposed to be playing some bass, even if you have a subwoofer.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
He contacted Golden Ear, and he had one of the best customer service experiences he can imagine. An actual person, Chet, answered the phone immediately. No waiting through automated menus or waiting on hold for an hour. Chet listened to Terry's full description of all the troubleshooting he had already performed on his own, and without making him do it all over again, which Lord knows I hate. When they tell you, have you rebooted the... Yes, I have.
That's right.
Or jump through any additional hoops, he agreed that the amplifiers were blown, and he simply asked if Terry would be comfortable replacing the amplifiers himself, a fairly simple process with full instructions provided, or if he'd rather set up an appointment at a local repair center. Terry decided to do it himself, so they charged his credit card for the 2 replacement amplifiers, $200 each, but he will get that money back once he sends his malfunctioning amplifiers back to Golden Ear. He can use the same packaging that the replacement amps came in. He bought these Triton 2 towers back in 2011. He's way out of warranty, but Golden Ear is completely standing behind them. And Chet was friendly, extremely helpful, and the replacement amps won't cost Terry anything. What more could you ask for? And now he'll feel good about selling his Golden Ear towers to their next owner. Man, yeah, That's a heck of an experience.
That is fantastic. And you know what? Like, I going back to what Joe was talking about when he was guest co-hosting a couple weeks ago, where it's like, there are the discount brands, online only, no customer service.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, they cost less for sure. But this, like, then there's the brands where it's like, okay, you aren't just paying for the material cost, and you aren't even just paying pure profit margin. Like, you can get them on the phone, that you can get like repair service, you can get customer service well after you're out of warranty, that type of thing. It's like, yeah, there is value to that as well. So I love it when companies stand behind their products like this. We should hope that more companies treat their customers this way. That is great. Kudos to Golden Ear for that. And that just, you know what? That makes Terry, that makes me, that makes everybody who hears that more likely to consider them, I would imagine, because even though it's not the product itself in your house when it's performing the way it should, it's like knowing that the company is going to be there to stand behind their products like that makes a difference. I value that.
Do you know, I've almost never used any customer service for any product ever, software, hardware, ever. One exception was when I was buying a video input device for my computer several years ago. I called Matrox sales line and asked a million questions. And there was a guy there who was super nice and answered all my questions slowly, carefully. And I was like, all right, this is definitely the device. And I remember asking him, okay, what happens in the future if you stop supporting this? And he's like, well, as long as this software keeps using this particular standard, it should still work. And so now it doesn't work.
Ah, yes. But that's not their fault. That's not the customer service fault.
No, it's not. But that's just my one and only experience of a nice, long customer service situation that was very good. Turned out to not be true. So that's because I'm the Charlie Brown of audio video, and everything is like, good grief, nothing works. All right, so back to questions. Second, he was able to set up a video consultation with Audio Advice where he talked with Seth, who knew about this podcast. With the video chat, they're able to look at Terry's room and discuss at length which speakers will work best in his setup. That's nice. Between their advice, our advice, and Terry's own research, he came to the conclusion that Revel speakers are the way to go. Terry and Seth shared a laugh because they knew Tom would say to get bookshelf rather than tower speakers, but it turned out that Revel's Concerta 2 F35 towers were on sale, making them less expensive than the bookshelf models. And they are sold individually. So with Terry's acoustically transparent Seymour AV screen up front, he could have 3 identical speakers across the front and all at a price that was significantly lower than buying a pair of bookshelf speakers and a dedicated center. Terry is very happy and satisfied with everything. I would be too. The speakers, the service, and AVRant's advice as well, since we helped guide him through all of this. So now to a question that popped up.
So again, kudos to Audio Advice. And, guiding him through all of that. And I would definitely agree with Revel speakers going there. You really can't go wrong. So sounds good all around.
Exactly. Not that it makes any significant difference in Terry's particular setup, but just looking at the specs, all of the Revel Concerta 2 speaker models he was considering are rated at 6 ohms nominal impedance. But the F35 towers have higher sensitivity than either the bookshelf or center speaker models. That just seems kind of counterintuitive that the physically largest speaker with more drivers would somehow play louder when using the same amount of power. Can we explain how that works?
So predominantly it's because there are different ways of measuring the sensitivity of a speaker. And what I'm talking about is the signal that is input, right? Because what you're doing is you're sending some type of standardized signal into the speaker through an amplifier, and then you're measuring the output that is coming from that signal at a distance of 1 meter, typically. But are you sending a single sine wave at a given frequency? Are you sending pink noise? Are you sending white noise? Like, what is that test signal? We don't necessarily know for sure. And if the type of signal that's being sent is full band pink noise or full band white noise, then that means that a speaker that is producing more bass is going to have more output overall. Or if you were to measure those speakers at only, say, 1.5 kilohertz or something like that and nothing else, then you might not see that difference. So because the tower speakers have a ported cabinet, they are producing more bass, it means that given the same full range signal, you're going to end up with cumulatively a louder output because there's less bass coming out of the bookshelf speaker and less bass coming out of the center speaker.
That actually makes sense, yeah.
Yeah. So even though it's the same signal going in, it's really the bass that's making the difference. It's not that somehow that tower is playing way louder with the exact same tweeter and mid-range driver in the treble and the mid-range. Those are standing pat, but it's producing more bass.
So it's just more sound coming out of that speaker.
That's a sound pressure level. There is more sound.
More sound. Ta-da. All right, moving on to Brannon has a question. Brannon wrote to us a few times a while back. He has a second location for his business where he stays a couple of days a week. He renovated and soundproofed a living area in which he has now set up a home theater space using 5 Focal 301 on-wall speakers. I feel like I remember this.
Yeah. I think you were here for this one.
I might have been here for this one. He knew all along that he wanted to make this an Atmos setup. So on our advice, he consulted with soundproofing company, and they came up with a plan that would allow him to install 4 in-ceiling speakers without compromising his soundproofing efforts. Brannon got his speakers and the Denon X3800H receiver that is driving them from Accessories for Less. And he intends to buy the 4 in-ceiling speakers from them as well. Good idea. The matching 6-inch 300 series in-ceiling speakers from Focal seem like the obvious choice, but they are $500 more per pair than Focal's 100 series 6-inch in-ceiling speakers, even from Accessories for Less. Brannon is quite sure he will be using this building for at least another 10 to 15 years with no intention of making any further speaker changes during that time. He's okay with spending the extra money if it's worth it, but these would be the overhead speakers for watching movies and playing video games. He won't be doing a lot of music listening. He'll be making and installing his own backer boxes. All of this sounds like previous questions. Thanks to soundproofing company's advice. So which in-ceiling Focal speakers do we say he should get? And I bet you're going to tell him to get the cheaper ones.
Yeah, so I mean, my real answer is if you know what you're using these speakers for are the overhead speakers in Atmos or DTS X, like if that's what you're using for, I can't in good conscience tell you to spend $1,000 more just for those 4 speakers. You're not going to hear the difference. Like you just aren't when all they're acting as is your overhead speakers. Where I hedge my bets just a little bit is if the idea is that you were going to sell this on to someone else and they wanted to use those overhead speakers, like maybe you take your on-wall, your 301 on-wall speakers with you, and they're going to use the overhead speakers you've installed as their music system, something like that, right? There is a difference. Like it's predominantly in, well, all the drivers between the 100 series and the 300 series are different. But that tweeter that they use in the 300 series, it's their aluminum magnesium inverted dome that Focal is sort of famous for. It gets darn close to their more expensive beryllium tweeters without costing quite as much as the beryllium ones. The tweeter in the 100 series, like if you were A/B comparing the 100 series, like critically listening, A/B comparing the 100 series to 300 series, I think you can hear a difference. I can pick out a difference pretty reliably between the tweeters in those 2 series of speakers. Like I say, for Atmos purposes, I just could not possibly care and justify the $1,000 price difference when we're talking about getting 4 of them. But if these were going to be like your only music speakers in this room, I could potentially justify. I'd still struggle a little bit because these are still in-ceiling speakers, probably going to be whole house audio type of sound that you're going for. I would still struggle, but I could maybe see my way to it that way. So I would put it to you that way. Is your intention to sell this on to somebody? It's going to be their music system, and you just like the idea that all the tweeters that all around you and above you are all going to match, and they're all going to have those flax drivers, and they're all going to be part of the same series. It's $1,000. Again, my real advice is not worth it. Not for Atmos, not worth it.
No, he's going to be there a while, he says. Quite a while. No, this is not where you put that $1,000.
Nah, not for Atmos.
Better places to put it. Moving on now to, oh boy, Infinite Gary.
It has to be. Lee is here.
I'm here. I get an Infinite Gary question. Excellent. Fantastic. And then there's like a multi-part. So
this might be the last one we do because I do have a time.
All right. I'll read.
We'll see what happens.
With great haste. I will. Gary is really on a kick looking up everything to do with the Oppenheimer film and its IMAX presentation. He heard it mentioned that because it's Christopher Nolan, even in the IMAX with laser locations that have more speakers available, the movie will still use the IMAX 6-track audio format, similar to how non-IMAX theaters will get a 5.1 audio mix, no Atmos. Mm-hmm. Do the 6 tracks in IMAX 6-track just refer to 5.1 channels, or is IMAX 6-track different in some way from the 5.1 audio mix that non-IMAX theaters will get? I have no IMAX knowledge, I must admit.
Yeah, so IMAX audio mixes are always done specifically for IMAX theaters. So there is no scenario where they just take an existing 5.1 Dolby Digital for a regular theater and put that into IMAX. They absolutely do not do that. It is always a mix specifically for IMAX. IMAX 6-track is actually 6 full-range speaker channels and a dedicated low-frequency effects channel. So, I mean,
so it's really a 6.1.
It's really a 6.1. The 6th speaker channel is a center height. They have a center speaker that is sort of in the middle, a little bit lower middle behind the screen, and then they have a center height because the idea is the IMAX screen is so tall that they want to be able to move sounds vertically on that massive IMAX tall screen as well. So it is inherently a different track setup than like Dolby Digital 5.1 or anything like that. It has that additional center height, and then IMAX versions are always mixed just for IMAX.
How about that? What are our thoughts on the fight for IMAX and how the scarcity of IMAX screens has created a situation this July where Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 will only be in IMAX for 1 week before Oppenheimer opens on July 21st with a guaranteed 3-week IMAX run. The agreement for Oppenheimer is rare, but Christopher Nolan has a special place in IMAX's heart because he uses our cameras and promotes us, quote unquote, according to IMAX CEO. But Tom Cruise has been attempting to secure more IMAX screenings for Mission Impossible 7, pointing out that last year Top Gun Maverick brought in more than $100 million from IMAX alone. I didn't realize that. That is a lot. IMAX CEO says he's hopeful that after Oppenheimer's guaranteed 3-week run, they might be able to bring Mission Impossible back to IMAX theaters. Meanwhile, Barbie also opens on July 21st, but it won't get any IMAX screenings at all. What's of note there is that it was shot entirely using Arri Alexa 65 cameras, which are IMAX certified digital cameras. And the aspect ratio is 2:1, which might have worked well on the 1.9:1 aspect digital IMAX screens. So are audiences missing out strictly due to scheduling conflicts? I mean, it may be so, money talks, and there's so few good IMAX theaters, like really done right.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're in the hundreds in the entire world, not even thousands of IMAX theaters. They're in the hundreds, as was mentioned, as far as ones that are still capable of actually showing physical film, IMAX film. It's 30 in the entire world, 30.
Wow, and nowhere near me.
Yeah, so I mean, there is just a shortage of IMAX theaters now. They're really expensive, you can only put them in populous centers where there's a chance of recouping the cost of installing one of these things. Yeah. So it's tough. I mean, naturally, there's just more big budget spectacle movies that all come out in the summer. That just tends to be the way that it is. There are all these different studios. They compete with each other. They're not there to all hold hands and
kidding.
I mean, if they can kind of stick it to one of the other studios, they do that a little bit. So, I don't know, all's fair in love and war type of thing.
It's just good old capitalism.
That's what it is.
It's a small crowd that honestly cares enough to really try to get the very best the intended viewing coming from someone
of
like...
course, 5 weeks after it premieres, putting Mission Impossible back in there, it's not going to make as much as if it had, 3 weeks in a row. It would definitely make more with 3 weeks in a row than it would 1 week, 3 week break, and then come back. There's no way Mission Impossible is going to make as much in IMAX as it potentially could. So, I mean, I get where Tom Cruise and the group over there is coming from. Yeah, they're like, hey, we could all make more money, but they already made this agreement with Christopher Nolan and Oppenheimer. They signed that thing. He is probably the loudest voice out there trumpeting the virtues of IMAX. So hey, they gave him a bit of a sweetheart deal. The Mission Impossible movie has been delayed multiple times. If they had come out earlier, if they'd come out in May, they wouldn't have this problem, would they? So yeah, I don't know. I don't really feel sorry for any of them.
No,
they're all still making millions and billions of dollars.
Sure, yeah.
They're all going to do okay. But yeah, is the audience missing out? I mean, hey, to some extent, sure. But it's not as though there aren't other large format besides IMAX theaters. So will you get the very best experience? I mean, I would argue you're not getting the very best Oppenheimer experience unless you see that movie in IMAX, because he really went full hog. That's actually the 1.43 to 1 aspect ratio, as big as IMAX can go. Mission Impossible and Barbie aren't. They're the 1.9 or the 2.0 to 1. So you can see those in one of the other large formats and not be losing a tremendous amount.
Right.
So, I think it actually kind of worked out fair.
It's just, I mean, it's a niche thing, honestly, and it's hard to make people understand how cool it is to see something where everything is maxed out. Everything exactly as somebody like Christopher Nolan intended.
And if you really want to see Mission Impossible in IMAX, you go that first week. That's what you do.
Yeah, and if you're me, you drive and drive and drive.
That's right. So I think we can do Corey's, and that will be it.
Okay, I will read quickly. Corey's question. Corey is living in a house with a fully finished basement, and he has set up a dedicated home theater room down there, but he doesn't intend to stay in this house for a long period of time. And with foundation walls and who knows what behind the ceiling drywall, running speaker wires inside the walls isn't the simplest installation. He purposefully went with overhead Atmos speakers that he could mount on the ceiling. Makes sense. Rather than cutting any big holes for in-ceiling speakers, he actually went with the Monolith THX satellites, and he's been quite happy with those. But running regular speaker wire up to those on-ceiling speakers just looks messy. He'd like something a little more elegant, but he really wants it to be as close to a zero repair situation as possible when he takes down the speakers and speaker wire. So is there anything we can suggest that will give him a clean-looking way to run speaker wire to those ceiling speakers without going inside the walls or ceiling and without leaving a mess when he takes them back down? And I bet you're going to tell him about flat cables that you can spackle around and paint.
Yeah, there's flat speaker wire. So, I mean, a couple of options here. I often recommend Sewell's Ghost Wire. This is exceedingly flat, self-adhesive speaker wire. It has the equivalent of 16 gauge. Monoprice has a version of this as well, essentially identical. And this is so flat that once you adhere it onto the wall, you can spackle over it. You could paint directly. If you painted directly, you could get up close and see the seam there. But you could spackle right over it and make it completely invisible if you want to do that. And then you do have to put the ends of this into a little junction box to turn it back into something that your regular speaker wire can connect to. Because this is truly flat, practically two-dimensional speaker wire.
But you do that right behind your speaker on the ceiling, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And down by the baseboard or something close to your AV receiver on the other end to plug it in on that side. Now, this isn't really something that you can easily remove, right? What you would be doing here is if you want to make it if you want to make it invisible for the next owner, then you're going to spackle over it, paint over it, and now the next owner won't even know that it's there when you take the speakers down.
You'd have to tell them about it and put a sticker.
That's right.
For the end of it.
You can point out where the junctions are, and that would be about the way that you do that. So if you don't want to go to that trouble, because if you want a really easy installation, to make this invisible is not dead simple because you are, spackling and painting. That's not nothing to put that up there. So Monoprice also has flat-ish, basically rectangular jacket speaker wire. Again, 16 gauge, which is perfectly fine going up to your Atmos speakers. I'm not worried at all that it's not 12 gauge wire or something silly like that. So this is not as flat as the Ghost Wire. It is not self-adhesive, but it is definitely flatter than regular speaker wire.
Sure.
And if you aren't like, he says he wants to make it tidy, not necessarily invisible, right?
Okay. Yeah, just not messy.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Because I can see how just draping regular speaker wire with some, like holders in there, things that you'll tack in or little staples, that type of thing. Yeah, it looks kind of messy. What you could do with this, like obviously it won't be invisible. It has some depth to it. It's not completely super flat, but you could actually affix this to the wall and the ceiling with museum putty. Because museum putty holds really, really well. And if it ever, lost its connection to the ceiling or something like that, it's literally you just warm up the museum putty in your hands a little bit and stick it back up there. Like the great thing about museum putty is that it holds really, really well, but it is completely non-marring to any finish. That's why they use it in a museum, to hold valuables on their stands or on the walls. And like you gotta pull pretty hard to remove museum putty, but when you do, it leaves no residue. It leaves nothing behind. It's not like the adhesive on the ghost wire where you can't really clean that up properly. You basically want to spackle over it and paint over it, and that's how you fix that. So I think this could definitely be a solution. It's not very expensive. The flat rectangular speaker wire that you could affix with some museum putty wouldn't be invisible, but would be very easy to remove and leave no residue when you're done. They'll sell it in a 100-foot spool for $36 or a 250-foot spool for $65. So it's not breaking
terrible.
the bank. The museum putty is not expensive, so you can get a bunch of that from Amazon. Get the Quake Hold brand, and that works really, really well. Right. If you do want to get the super flat, the ghost wire style, that's $38 for 50 feet if you're going from Monoprice. So a little bit more expensive, but not crazy out of the realm. But you would need to do something over that.
These super flat speaker wires, if you need to turn a corner, do you fold it?
You got to do some folding on that ghost wire. Yeah, that's the way you got to do it. Yeah. Whereas with the sort of rectangular one, then you're kind of routing it in the corner the way you would regular speaker wire.
Gotcha.
But you can sort of fix it all. So depending on how invisible you want it to be, if this is really just about tidying it up, I think that rectangular speaker wire makes more sense because that is easy to remove in the future if you just affix it with some Quake Hold, some museum putty.
And take it right along with you. Yeah,
yes,
excellent. Look at that, man. We got in under the wire for when you need to leave, yet we also gave the 2-hour club their necessary 2 hours.
That's what we promised we would do. We're men of our word. I will mention we do have a couple on the list. They hear from Mark and Jack. Those questions are on the list and will be answered first up next week. I don't know if Tom is back next week or not. I might have Lee here again. I might get somebody else. I don't know what the situation is.
That's okay. So if you need me, I'm here. Maybe by next week, I've made progress on my new computer and I can be beautiful for you on my fancy camera. We'll see. I hope so, man. It made me so mad yesterday. Oh God, it was like angering me and depressing me. It's just so much in my mind revolves around this. I have so many great creative ideas I want to do with the new computer, and it's just not working.
You'll get there one day, Lee. You'll get there one day.
I mean, the idea that you could click a software button in a utility and then a device never works right again.
That's how it goes. Or it's just you. Might be just
you. It could just be me. There's the AV screw-up cloud follows me.
That's what it was for me. But before we head out here, I want to thank our listeners of the week one last time.
Yes.
So, Joe, thank you so much for the PayPal donation. Shout out to avscience.com. Happy to support them.
That's
Happy
right.
that they're supporting us. And over at patreon.com/AVRant podcast, you can sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. If you haven't already done so, 138 people have. There are patrons and listeners of the week this week, and Dale is one of them. So thank you all very much for the financial support. I want to give a thanks to Vince for sending me an Amazon gift card.
Yeah, buddy.
Thanks to Terry and Brannon, both of us who talked us up to retailers. Audio device in the case of Terry, accessories for less in the case of Brannon. And then some folks sent us notes of gratitude just for keeping the podcast going through thick and thin. So thank you to Gurinder, Nick, Vince, Adam, Terry, Brannon, Dale, Karl, and Toke.
I especially want to thank Toke for obvious reasons.
Right.
His comment. He's a brilliant man.
The brilliantest of them all. So thank you all very much for the notes of encouragement. They're super appreciated. Big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions. To send in your questions and have them answered on this podcast, all you have to do is email us at question@avrant.com. So on behalf of Tom Andry and for AVRant, I am Rob H.
And I'm Lee Overstreet. Go out and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.